Let's go.
You're listening to Making Data Simple, where we make the world of data effortless, relevant, and yes, even fun.
Welcome to Making Data Simple. Once again, this is where we talk about trending technologies, business innovation, leadership, just about everything. And we like to have a little bit of fun. I'm always learning, so you'll learn along with me. Today, I have Luke Arrigoni, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Arricor. As I was doing research on Luke, I found that he has a degree in mathematics. I have a degree in electrical engineering, but where we align is he enjoys getting people excited about otherwise dry topics like data. I don't think it's dry anymore. It's sexy now. To some, maybe it's a little bit dry. I got a few friends that haven't figured it out yet, but he creates a meaningful narrative around how it applies to everyone and how it impacts everyone, even if you don't know today how it impacts you. Over the past 15 years, Luke has worked with some of the top brands in the United States, building machine learning and data science programs. Some of those have been Getty Images, Janssen, UPS, AT&T, Thomson Reuters, Goldman Sachs. I could go on. Little Caesars, got to say that one. Pizza. You know, so he's been around. He knows the drill. Luke, thank you for being on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Al. I'm happy to be here.
Why don't you introduce yourself, give a little bit of background in terms of what brings you here. When I say that, I mean, what's your history? What's your experience? Where did you start off? Go back a little ways if you don't mind.
Sounds good. All right. So, I wasn't ever sure if I'd go into computers, and it was something that I just kind of stumbled upon. When I was in high school, I worked for this real estate brokerage, and I used to deliver eviction notices, and it was a horrible job, right? But they were trying to do comp analysis. It was kind of like right before Zillow, and they were trying to determine how they can automatically figure out how much a house is worth. And I was like in calculus. I was like, I'll just solve this so I don't have to deliver eviction notices. And I did, and it was a lot of fun. And there was a little simple algorithm that I'd probably be ashamed of today, but it worked really effectively back then. And I kind of got hooked on the idea that I could make my life and other people's lives simpler by just trying to apply math to some of the data. And that has greatly evolved. And now there's neural nets and GPUs and all kinds of fun stuff I'm sure we'll talk about today. But I kind of fell into it, and I have just consistently been doing that for 10, 15 years now. One of my first jobs after school was actually at a creative artist agency, and they were trying to figure out how much movies would make. And I was like, well, I'll figure that out. The hubris of youth, right? And I did, and it was fun. And, I've been doing that, as you mentioned, my client list for a while now. So
I like the picture you have in the background that others can't see. It's like a millennial Einstein. I've never seen that before. With tats and everything else. Very nice. I like it. You didn't do that, did you?
No, I did not. No, there's a couple of them around like that. I forgot the artists, but they're fun. So
how did you find us? Or did we find you? Or did we find each other?
I think we found each other. I know that I had seen your podcast in the past, and I loved it and enjoyed it. And then, as life would have it, I got an email from some of your people saying like, hey, would you like to be on the show? And I said, absolutely. I haven't done podcasts in a bit because I've been really busy with work, but I'm happy to make an exception for you.
That's great. You say you're making an exception. When we talked right before jumping on to the recording, you said you were busy starting a new company. Is that right? Or am I allowed to say that or what?
No, it's okay. Yeah, of course. There's I've been doing Arricor for 10, 15 years, largely as a services company where we've been helping build these machine learning programs, and we train engineering staff and data science staff, and we help business really accomplish these big goals. But this other company is more of a product-based company. It's goloti.com, GOLOTI. And really what it is facial recognition for the web. And it's being able to control your identity. So it's more product-based, but there's all kinds of challenges that come with a product-based company where you're selling people this idea of, pay us $25 a month and we'll know when your image shows up anywhere, and then you can DMCA it to take it down. That kind of thing. And so I get both challenges these days, all the service company challenges and all the product company challenges. And it's been fun, but exhausting.
So that's an interesting spin on facial recognition. For us here at IBM, we've gotten out of facial recognition for privacy purposes, but you're kind of using it in that regard for privacy.
Mm-hmm. Huh?
How'd you
That's
get into
exactly
that?
it.
Something must have triggered you or tipped you off.
Yeah. So, as the story will have it, we did some work for the Ukrainian military back when the war started, and they had a need for facial recognition. We didn't feel comfortable charging them given the state that everything was in, but we talked about maintaining some of the intellectual property because we saw that there would be an advantage for using this for, for this kind of privacy protection. And so we built the models for them. It was literally wartime tested. And we said, okay, well, how do we make this model help everyone, right? And we did that, and we spun it into this idea that let's go ahead and scrape the web, and we'll have people validate their identity with us, and then we go through, and then you can control where things show up. One of the biggest parts of this is, there's privacy, like hidden camera type violations that people have to experience that we unfortunately catch pretty frequently and allow people to take down within 17 hours. So it's interesting. I could probably talk to a whole hour about the weirdness of facial recognition, but it sounds like you're pretty comfortable and familiar with that space, so you get it.
Yeah, semi. I mean, I'm always learning something. All right, well, let's take a step back. Go back to your original work of art,
Arricor, yes.
which is Arricor, and let's talk about the use case or the mission behind Arricor.
Yeah, so that came about, I don't know, 2010-ish or so, and I had just left a creative artist agency, and I had done a couple of startups, and I really wasn't doing much, and I started getting calls from different companies asking me if I could help them with this data problem. I got a cool reputation in LA of being able to look at data and kind of figure out, we'll call it the line of best fit. And I said, okay, well, I'll just create a company, call it Arricor. As boring as that sounds, it was just meant to be a company I could charge people under, right? It wasn't meant to be like a big brand or anything. And then as time has gone on, we've actually have been able to establish ourselves pretty well. I was listed in Forbes a couple of years ago as a top entrepreneur, and we get calls from some of the biggest brands on earth to see if we can spike on really hard problems. And all of it's kind of word of mouth. A VP here tells a VP there, hey, you got to call Luke and his team, see what they can do on this problem for you. And that keeps us very busy.
What problems are you solving? Give us an example.
So
complex
we do a lot of computer vision work. So
Yeah.
trying to figure out what's inside of an image without any text. And that, of course, requires us to harvest text and things like that. We would call that, also like a search space within images and videos. But also there's contextual things like, is this a sad image or a happy image? There's things along those lines. We do a lot of predictive work for some of our companies that are trying to figure out like forecasting, but that's not as hard. Probably one of the harder spaces now is natural language, right? Is being able to take a whole bunch of text and figure out not only what's being said, but who is saying it and how they're saying it, sentiment inside of that text, and putting it in a space that you can search and index, if that makes sense.
Well, it does make perfect sense. However, right now let's just talk ChatGPT. We got to get that out. Everybody's got to hit ChatGPT once, as you're doing any conversation, no matter
of course,
what it is.
Of course.
But they would say, look, isn't it getting easier with generative AI around natural language processing?
Yeah. So this brings up a whole big kind of can of worms, right? So ChatGPT is part of this whole class of models that we're all probably tired of hearing, but we call it large language models, right? And they're not alone. There's several models out there. Some are open sourced. Hugging Face has a great one. But the idea here is, okay, if we have these models that can generate text, and it feels like a lot of these things are kind of solved, where's the next step? And a lot of it is in prompt engineering. A lot of it is still in the creativity that you can pull out of it. Like, imagine if you met the wisest man on earth. And I'm not calling these LLMs wise or intelligent or anything like that, but let's take this example. Let's say you met the wisest man or woman that had ever lived. You would only get value out of that conversation based on how good your questions were, right? Like if you went to them and said, hey, what should I eat for dinner today? They'd probably have a very wise answer. But you need to be able to ask more intelligent things like, how do I manage complex human relationships, right? And if you don't know how to ask those questions, you're not going to get a lot of value from it. LLMs present us with a very similar problem. It's like when we talk about natural language, we're like, we can't just shove it in ChatGPT and be done. we need to put it in Chat GPT or other LLMs and then ask the correct question. Like if I took the text of this podcast and I said, was Al stressed on any questions, right? That's a unique kind of question. And maybe we could determine from your language that it was stressed. But we would need to know what the application for that is, right? Is it binary? How do we use it? Is it searchable? Does it mean that I change my responses from it? So it really just gives us this new tool that's really generic, like a hammer. And we all have to decide how we're going to use it.
Is that where prompt engineering, as your reference, comes in?
Correct. Prompt engineering is going to be a big part of that.
Could you say more on where?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll expand. So prompt engineering is this idea that because it's so vast, you're looking at a near infinite amount of sequences that can be put out from one of these large language models. You have to be careful on the words you choose, and you have to be careful about what your real intention is on what comes out of it. Otherwise, you'll just get something generic. Here's a good example. If you go into one of these LLMs and you say, hey, I want you to code up this thing that does this complicated process, right? You're kind of trying to describe it. It will go out and find the average of all ways to solve that problem and actually write some maybe Python code for you. But if you go back and you, instead of saying, hey, I want you to solve this complicated problem, you say, I want you to solve this complicated problem with, computational performance in mind. Well, it might pick a different path. Right now, it's trying to be aware that computational performance means something to you. Or what I end up doing with LLMs when I try to brainstorm is I'll actually talk about certain papers. So I prime these LLMs ahead of time to know that these are the papers that I'm talking about. And then I'll ask the question, because then I start to narrow down to a very finite space where the answers that come out are very close to what I'm looking for.
So prompt engineering, is that where your company, Arricor, is spending a large amount of your time?
No, what we're doing is a little bit more nuanced than that. We have two different areas where we spend a lot of the LLM time. One is fine tuning. So we take LLMs, and before we even ask it a question, we prime it with lots and lots of text first to basically say, hey, look, you can talk about airlines and flying kites and digging tunnels, but right now we just want you to focus on, a card game, right? Like something really specific. And then we'll ask questions. So fine tuning is a big part. The second part is we've been doing a lot of work in density. So understanding how dense a part of we'll call it an embedding space is important to us because we want to know if the answers that come out are unique or if the answers that come out are very generic, and we can do that with density. And that will help inform us. So we would say, hey, look, the answer that came out was really unique. We're in a very unique part of the space. And that's, I don't know, in many levels, it informs the next steps we can take.
So how does that tie into the use cases you're solving for clients? Obviously, you're into visual inspection, et cetera. You must have a strong suit in that area of AI, but you're also talking about natural language processing as well. What are some of the use cases?
So let's take something practical. I'll slightly adjust a recent customer. Let's say that you made a bunch of YouTube videos or special videos on how to play tennis really well, right? We'll say you had 800 hours of tennis tutorials. Well, what we can do is take that video and that text that you're speaking in, turn it into text, and then we can train an LLM on tennis words and tennis concepts, put all of your text from your speech into this LLM, and out will come numbers. Now, what these numbers represent is like a GPS location inside of a high dimensional space. And then when a customer comes to us and says, one of your customers comes to you and says, they type in, I want to know what to do under this particular scenario in tennis, right? Like they had an issue, they're trying to figure out the best strategy. Well, somewhere in your 800 hours, you probably have spoken about this, right? But keywords are not going to be enough. You need the concept. We call it the semantic space. You need to be able to match the idea of what they're trying to search for with the idea of what you spoke about. And so what we do is we say, okay, we've turned all of your videos into numbers that are searchable using an LLM. Now let's turn their query into something searchable. And then we have two sets of numbers, the numbers that they're searching on, even though they don't see any of this, and the numbers that represent your videos. And through that search, we'll go back and say, hey, video number 49 had a segment here, and that segment talked a lot about the scenario that we think the person is curious about. Let's return not only the point in the video where you're talking about it, but the whole video together so that they can kind of learn about it. It's like YouTube search if you've ever seen it. But you might think, hey, this is like a video search. It's really not. It's text search. It's LLMs.
And are you essentially taking the video and essentially converting it to natural language to allow for the search around natural language?
Yes. If you rethink about the problem, right, and you think about it as the YouTube video is just a different way of getting into someone, like that's output, right? The real part of the searchable space is the text. It's what's said. You think about videos as an LLM problem, and suddenly it's very solvable.
But in that case, how does it scale?
Most of the solutions we build for our customers are a pipeline of models. It's not just one. So the first thing turns the speech into text, and then the text into an LLM represented, we call it vectors, and then the vectors into a searchable space, and then, so on. So there's kind of a whole pipeline, and one stage of the pipeline is dropping that video and turning it into text.
So obviously your one key area is video recognition. Hence the reason is I look at some of the references you have, like Getty Images, Fox. I presume you're doing a lot of search around videos, it looks like. Video recognition.
That's absolutely the case. So our area of differentiation is something I think a lot of your customers are going to really relate to, which is we think about the problems differently. So you might go to an AI provider and they'll be like, oh, this is a video problem. Let's go find a bunch of video algorithms to process these videos. My team will look at the videos and say, no, this is an LLM problem, because at its heart, you are communicating language to another person. And so our big differentiator, and the reason why we get called by teams that people have entire, teams of PhD data scientists, is because we can look at the problem slightly differently and solve it simpler and better. But yeah, right now we do a lot of stuff with video because that's very complicated. And the biggest part is it's compute heavy. To put a video through, a GPU, like to actually run it through a model, it's extremely expensive. So if you can think about the problem differently, you can make solutions feasible, like not just cheaper, but like before it wouldn't even be possible.
As a pause, going back to where we started, you talked about a new company on visual recognition. Why not just pull it into the same company?
Because this is really more or less a business decision, not a technical one. Because I feel like the demands of the product business are so unique that I would basically have to run two different organizations, because product and services have two sometimes, opposed kind of problem sets. So like, for instance, for product companies, you try to put as much energy as possible into making a self-sufficient, amazing product. And with services companies, you spend a ton of time talking to customers, figuring out that before you write a single line of code, you're solving the business problem they want you to solve. Product, you will just turn someone away if you're not solving the right problem for them. Like, oh, sorry, we're not a good fit.
So Arricor, primarily services then?
Yes, it's 100% services. Yep.
100%. Okay.
Yeah, we're bespoke services too. We get called for very specific problems that teams really have a hard time solving.
Well, don't you create intellectual capital models, by example, along the way that you could resell?
Well, it's not for us to resell. Our customers own them. And so this one that we did with the Ukrainian military was an exception. But most of the time we build and it's not even patentable. It's trade secret. The stuff we build, no one even wants to tell other people that they have.
Now, do you create your own large language model, or do you use an existing model out there?
We do both. It depends on the appetite of the customer. If the customer really needs something specific, we will tell them, hey, look, we have to build something specific then. It's going to cost more and take longer. But if we can get away with using something off the shelf, we like to pass that savings off, so we'll tell them. But we do both.
I have a philosophy on how these large language models will be used, but putting that aside, that's leading my questioning though. But I presume if you're dealing with enterprise customers, you want them to control their data. They wouldn't want to scrape the internet or something like that. It's their data in their environment, pulling that large language model in, then tailor and prompted relative to their domain.
Yes. Can
you say more on how that process kind of plays out?
Yeah.
How that services process plays out?
So some people, like if you're talking about medicine, you're talking about a lexicon that's completely different from how you and I would ever speak normally. I mean, it's like even the prefix and suffixes that were common in medicine would never be common in normal colloquial English, right? And
Hmm.
so if you take a model like GPT and run medical information through it, obviously like it's been trained on medicine, like it's going to not do bad. In fact, we've seen a lot of that, and there's some scares in industry that GPT-4 will practice medicine. It's not. And doctors aren't even that really concerned with that because they know that the nomenclature is so far off. It's really like the average of what all medical texts would say, which is not helpful in a hospital. And so what you do is you would take medical texts, journals, published works, and then you would turn that into a text that you can run back into one of these models. And then you have, like I keep reusing it, but we have a fine-tuned model from that. So you gather data that's specific to the kind of language, and then you'd retrain.
One of the scared, talking about people that are scared about large language models, where we are, where we're going, etc., is hallucinations. How do you avoid that?
The worst industry to do that in is medicine. So I mean,
Why is that?
easily.
Why is it the worst though?
Oh man, because you'll have an AI confidently give a diagnosis that's wrong, right? And so like that's problematic.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
What you could do, or what you could think about with AI hallucinations is, um, yes, they're really common with LLMs, but there will need to be other models that are built to try and check that model to make sure that what it's saying is practical or real. Like one of the more famous hallucinations that happened recently was in a legal case in New York, where it
Yes.
hallucinated, these fictitious cases, and the lawyer actually submitted these cases in a brief, and the opposing counsel like filed something with the court, like, "Hey, like these just don't exist." It would have been easy if there was another model. No, I'm not blaming the lawyer for this, or maybe I am, but it's not. We're not talking about the like whether that was
Yeah,
good
I
idea.
understand.
But I mean, like if you ran a legal advisory company like Thomson Reuters, Westlaw, right? You can have a model that would at least check to see if these things were correct or not. Like, do these cases exist? Does it match the context? So hallucinations can be solved, but they require more machine learning or more human intervention.
You'd like to be able to get to a point where you can still take advantage of a large language model and yet say, I don't know, if you don't know the answer. So you're not giving
Yeah.
somebody false information.
Well, that's what comes back to kind of my rambling around that extra model for checking, right? You do want that extra model that can say, I think this is a hallucination.
But there's no other way to avoid it, even if you're creating your own large language model.
There isn't really. There isn't a way to prevent them from ever happening. It's just best to catch them. And it also is, in this very philosophical way, fascinating to think about that as soon as we make a machine that can speak with as much, I don't know, verbosity or brevity as it wants to, it makes stuff up. Like there's something humanoid in that that's kind of funny to think about. But it's also inevitable, you know? Like I don't know how to teach something language, human or otherwise, and make it so that it'll never ever speak an untruth. It's bizarre.
It is kind of bizarre. I mean, I think that's what makes people very interested, or what is caught their eye, so to speak, around Chat GPT, because it talks in stories. We think in terms of stories, and when you start looking
Hmm.
at it, it's like, oh my goodness, this thing's alive. No, it's not alive. It's
And it
just,
lies to us. It's definitely not
yeah.
alive. Yeah, but I mean, like it lies to us. It does. It's humanoid in a very funny way. I think that it takes aspects of our own humanity and puts it under the spotlight, right? Like one of the more fascinating parts is of image generation. Not to jump ship too quick to that, but that it's a
Right.
reflection of the images that we've created. That AI is not inventing any new form of imagery or new form of art, but taking the language and the art that we've made in the past and regurgitating it. So, in many ways, it also reflects our biases as a species.
Well, absolutely it does. So, are you working with any insurance companies? Just curious.
No, actually, not right now. I've done
I would,
health insurance in the past.
house insurance would be a great model for visual inspection. There's somebody I know of that's got their house roof replaced 3 times in the last 9 years, by example. Now, how he did that, I don't know. But anyway, um, And I'm not saying he's making it up. In other words, damage to his roof, because I think he has had hail in the roof 3 times. But you would think this would be key for insurance companies to be able to see the before and after via visual recognition.
Right. You have Apple coming out with their Vision Pro $3,500 augmented reality. I don't know. Those glasses, right? It's like Google Glass, but kind of well thought out and probably will hit production. The idea that someone can have a camera like the people that installed it and maybe take a picture or video for insurance reason, or the owner having to do it, or some kind of claims adjuster, I think that's coming. And being able to have visual classifications of whether it was done correctly, those will all be used and used often, because there'll be things that a computer can see that humans cannot. And we'll find that those claims adjuster, or that whatever that role is that takes those videos, the video itself will be done much better. Like, let's say that there's fasteners on every tile of that roof. And so I'm not a roofer, so anyone that hears that and laughs at me, laugh with me or laugh at me. That makes sense. But let's say that there is a way to check how each one was fastened to the roof. For a human to check every single tile or every single panel would be almost impossible, right? But with a computer, you could scan a 2,000 square foot section of the roof and then immediately decide like every single fastener was on correctly, or there's one that's not.
You said you started this since what, 2011? Is that what it was?
Yeah, about that time. Mm-hmm.
AI has been around for a long time, but depending on it's different eras, if
Yeah.
you will. Has the influence of ChatGPT really driven your business through the roof, or has it been, pretty consistent?
It's been chaos, total chaos, absolute. And so
But
I've
does
been
it give you
around
more
since.
distractions then? I mean, are you trying to?
What's crazy is my career started out like just out of school, like just the newest person you can think of trying to like make their way in the world, and I'd get sat down and someone would send me so much data, and I would literally use a whiteboard to find the line of best fit. I'm using like real calculus, and like I'm trying to like make an equation that makes sense, right? And that was the world that everything started off in. And then when crypto became big and people made these GPUs that were like 1,000 times faster than a CPU for vector math, it unlocked all these crazy tools. I would say the last 6 years or 7 years has been a wild ride. In the last 6 months has been the wildest it has ever been. And I have this, I call many people to get advice and mentorship. I'm just to make sure that I'm not doing anything crazy. And so I call a friend and I tell him like, man, I have acquisition offers. I have people that want to build crazy systems tomorrow. I have every client on fire thinking the world is over because GPT is going to destroy their whole business. Like, there's chaos on every front. What should I do? Well, the friend's a sailor, right? He does sailing, and he says, when there's a hurricane, do you know what we do? And I said, what? And he said, we just batten down the hatches and go downside. We just wait it out. And I thought, well, that's not helpful advice. Then I went back and I thought about it more. And I was like, actually, that's the exact advice I need. And so the last 6 months, I've kind of just been waiting for the chaos to die down. And it is dying down. It's really fascinating. I didn't do anything crazy in that meantime. I didn't commit myself to anything too insane. And now that the world is mellowing out, I'm in a perfect place to strike again. So while the world did kind of spike up in chaos, I didn't do anything chaotic to it. And I'm in the best possible place I can be in at the moment.
Do you feel like you may have missed something in there? I mean, like,
no, I think that like that FOMO is what drives people to make chaotic things. Because and also like I guess it depends on your position, right? Like for me, we are market leaders for generating AI. Like if you want something state of the art, you'd call my team to do it. So for us, we're not going anywhere anytime soon. We can afford to just wait to see what happens. We don't have to sell out to the first person. We don't have to commit ourselves to a different thing. Like we've largely been able to just survive that kind of storm. And so now we're in a place where we are actually getting very attractive offers to build incredible tools. And I'm really glad that I skipped all of the first initial wave of things that came over.
How did you skip it? You just ignore it? You go into
no. Sometimes you entertain them. So the offers come through and you field them. You're like, okay, does this make sense for me? Does this make sense for my company? Does this make sense for my employees? Right? And through that process, you decline. Right? You say, hey, this isn't going to be a good fit for our project or our team. Other things come through, and you have to make a kind of decisions for everyone. You just make the most conservative one possible. And that seems to be effective at the moment. So the world will continue to spin in chaos, and there's all this regulation that's going around and stuff, and we'll see how everything spins. But in the meantime, I'm just trying to keep a level head, because I think that when everything does die down, we're still going to be on top.
You could have maybe got a crazy value, though.
We did get a crazy value. And then maybe a month after that, I found out that the value was actually much crazier than I imagined. And I'm so glad I didn't take that
you
first
got a
offer.
crazy value, and you're actually
crazier. It's even higher. Yeah, than I thought. Yeah, someone they seriously sent an offer, and I called. That's why I called the mentor. And the mentor was like, I just don't know. Like, are you sure that's what? It was an 8-figure offer, and I was like, that sounds good, right? And they're just like, no, you should just wait this out. And immediately after, there's other opportunities that opened up where I don't want to speak too soon, but there's some interstellar opportunities for us that now we're open to that we would have been locked out of had we gone with the first thing that came to our door.
Hey, podcast listeners, I'm going to stop it here because we ran long. Next week, we'll talk about Luke being the top entrepreneur by Forbes, AI ROI, how to keep top talent, what AI's biggest blockers are, and lessons learned. So stay tuned. We'll continue next week. Thank you.